So anyway, I got onto the 405 and it was a parking lot. We were just inching forward. And if you get stuck in one of these traffic jams, it is about 2.5 hours. Okay, so there I am, and you get to about 3 miles is the amount of time that you travel, and you're just going nowhere, and you're very unhappy with it. So anyway, my way of getting through this, as it were, is that I had brought this newsletter that I was going to then read as I sat in this car, and my foot's on the brake, but I'm definitely reading, and then I take my foot off the brake forward a little bit as I'm reading, and this is what I'm doing as I'm making my way slowly along the freeway, and I bet you know where this is going, okay? Here I am looking down, doing this number with my foot, and I thought the car in front of me had continued to move forward, but it turns out that it had not continued to move forward, and I had a little bit of an accident. Now, I dented this poor car in the most minuscule of ways, but it was a very, very posh car that I had run into. I think it was one of those Mercedes, but it was like a big Mercedes, like for 8 people or something, okay? And even though I didn't really hurt the car very much, the bill that they then said was going to need to be paid to make this better was more money. It was actually about twice what I had in savings for my entire life, okay? It was a lot. But you know what? I wasn't even remotely worried about it, because a number of years before, when I decided I was going to drive, they told me, "You're not going to drive. We're not going to let you get behind any vehicle until you have a little thing called insurance," which I thought was annoying at the time, to have to get insurance. And so I put money into this thing, and then the most annoying of things happened. I had to keep putting money into this stupid little thing that I thought was a shakedown, really. I thought, this is a shakedown. They just take money from you and they never give you anything, and the government makes you do it. How obnoxious. But then it turned out that later on it protected me from unforeseen circumstances, didn't it? It saved me from being bankrupted when I was just in my 30s, okay, or 20s or whatever it was, all right? It saved me from the unforeseen circumstance, something that I had done prior, something that I had to pay into, something that I had to give my attention to for an extended amount of time, that I thought, this will never be of any worth. It actually turned out to be my salvation letter. Well, what does God's word say? We're going through Proverbs, and Proverbs is all about wisdom. And this wisdom, it turns out, is not quite like what we think wisdom should be like. We would imagine that we would just apply our minds to something and suddenly we would become wise. We must have it within ourselves to just sit down and think, and someday we will become wise people if we just think our way through life. But God says that wisdom isn't like that at all. That wisdom is this gift from God, this gift that benefits and that blesses us, that only comes from God. You can't get it in normal sources. You can't get it in the self-help book. You can't get it in the yoga or in the mindfulness or in any number of things that you could go to seeking out wisdom. You won't get wisdom there. It's this thing that God gives you that then blossoms. And last week we saw things that grow. We saw that you could reject God, and that would be like putting a little seed into the ground, and then it would just grow up, and it would turn out that this isn't a good seed. It would be a weed in your garden, an obnoxious thing that gets so big it just takes over your life, and you wish you could just rip it out. And God doesn't help you. He says, no, you made your choice. And it was just kind of this negative moment where we can make the choice, and people often do, to say, God, later. And what they're actually doing is they're putting a seed into the ground and saying, I don't know what's going to come. And a big, huge weed comes up. And it's just a hideous thing that they don't want. But it's too late. Well, so that was all very negative. Now let's take a look at a positive idea, which is that we can take and we can ask God for wisdom now. And that's like putting a seed into the ground. And up grows this beautiful and this luxurious tree that protects us, that restores us, that makes our souls flourish. Just like that car insurance, right? Okay, it protects us from the unforeseen. That's my lousy connection to this sermon, all right? There's the protection. And that's what we're going to look at today. And my big idea for us is pay for wisdom today. And tomorrow you'll be protected by wisdom. Pay for wisdom today. And tomorrow you'll be protected by wisdom. Let's begin with the word pay, okay? Let's begin with the word pay. And let's take a look at this. If you don't have your Bibles already open in front of you, we're on page 636 of the little blue Bibles in front of you. If you do not have a Bible, please feel free to take this home as a gift from our church to you. We really want and we really believe that the answers to life are in this book. And so we want you to have that if you don't have one. And we're going to start in verse 1 of chapter 2 in front of you. This is what it says. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, if you turn your ear to wisdom, apply your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, if you look for it as silver and search for it as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of God. And you'll find the knowledge of God, the fear of the Lord, Wisdom is a gift. Wisdom is a gift, isn't it? It's not something that we earn. It's something that God gives us. And we've looked at this idea. And yet, having said that it's a gift, in some sense, it's costly, isn't it? If you take a look at what he says here, there is kind of a lot of words to describe the action that you go to get this thing, isn't there? It's not a passive gift. Look at what we have here. You have to take words. You have to, what else do we have? Store up commands. Incline your ears. Apply your heart. Cry out. Call out. This is intensive seeking. There's a lot of activity going to get this thing going. It's not just like you're handed this on a platter. It's not a gift that you open and then you put in the corner and there's nothing more to do with it. It's like one of those things that has a huge instruction manual and they're like, oh, I'm going to have to be at this for the next 2 hours. I'm going to have to be at this for a while. Wisdom requires investment. Wisdom requires cost. Do you want it? Well, you're going to really have to want it. Or you won't get it. If you will do these things. And look at what it says here. If you will cry out for it. What's the last thing that you cried out for? And you lifted your voice up and said, I need this. It's actually kind of inappropriate to do, right? In a culture, it's not appropriate to raise your voice loudly at all in any fashion whatsoever, but particularly to make known that you have a need. That's really embarrassing. Don't do that, right? In fact, we don't do it very often. When do we do that sort of thing? When someone's in danger, maybe. If somebody's just cut themselves in a semi-dangerous way, we might say, we need help over here. This person has hurt themselves. If you were going through the desert and you didn't have any water, and suddenly the possibility of having water becomes something that is an option, right? Maybe you enter a city and you're on your last leg. You might put all social conventions aside for a moment and say, I need water. Or consider a baby. They know how to cry out, right? When they need food, since they don't have the same apprehensions that we do, they just wail until they get what they need. And God says, I want you to have thus for wisdom, a thirst for it, a hunger for it, and to seek it. And you hear the emotion in that, and the desire. I need this, like food. I'll starve if I don't have it. Cry out for God. Cry out for wisdom. This is the way that we have to seek it. And notice this, it says that you're seeking it as silver or as a hidden treasure. Now, in this society, this is the 2nd century BC, already like by the 1100s, really, this is changing. But in this time, before Christ, the 2nd century BC, silver is the most expensive commodity you can have. It's more expensive than gold, primarily because in Egypt, they had a ton of gold. So they're like, ooh, silver's the thing. So at this point, silver is the most expensive thing that you could own. They didn't even know about platinum, okay? This was the top. This was the most expensive thing that could be in your house. God says, seek it like that. Seek it like your hidden treasure. Seek it like the most expensive thing you could possibly purchase. In other words, seek it with all of your being. Seek it as if it's the one thing that you need, and you'll find satisfaction if you get it. I have a lot of expensive stuff. Actually, we all have a lot of expensive stuff. Everyone in this room has a ton of expensive stuff. If you were to think about the amount of stuff that we have and compare it to just like 100 years ago, I mean, we are just living the high life here. I have had expensive cars, I've had expensive watches, I've had expensive clothing, I've had expensive shoes. These are pretty nice. I have expensive stuff, and the level of excitement that I have for these expensive things is much higher than my desire for wisdom and my desire for God. I don't want it as much as I want my gigantic TVs. I don't want it as much as I want the nice things that I get. And Solomon says, flip that all on its head. Crave wisdom. Crave it. Seek it. And you get your heart into it. I was thinking about this. Sometimes you come to church and it's almost an emotionless experience. There's not a lot going on. There's not a lot going on your side. It's not like you showed up to church thinking, I can't wait to commune with the living God today. It's like, this isn't my routine. I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to move on to the next thing I have today. And God wants to interact with us in this very personal way, to come into his presence, to come into his wisdom. That's the way we're to seek it. And this is not just here. This is in the whole Bible. So let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6, one of the most famous and important verses in the Torah. And we'll see that this is what God has called people to just all along. In 6, we'll start in verse 4. It's page 185. It's the Shema. Okay. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. In other words, love him with everything. Everything that you have, everything that you are, everything that defines you, orient it towards God. That is what we're called to do. Do you want wisdom? It will cost you everything. Or you won't get it. You won't get it. Now, let's consider how when we seek God this way, only then does God give what we lack. Only after we seek and we cry and we search for it and our heart's in it. So let's look at verse 5 and notice this. Then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He's a shield to those whose way of life is blameless. For he guards the course of the just. He protects the way of his faithful ones. He protects the ways of his faithfulness. So what we learn about God is actually wisdom is kind of part of his character, okay? And I want you to think about wisdom in a relational way. How do I get wisdom? Well, you're going to have to go to the wise person, and the wise person happens to be God. So here's God looking at you, and he's saying, do you want wisdom? Do you want me, in essence? And if we're like, yeah, well, that sounds like a good deal, I guess. Maybe. I mean, my parents did that, so I guess I'll do that too. If that's how we're approaching him, it's like, no. Seriously, that's what he says. No. But when he sees the intent of our heart, that we really want to know him, when we turn and we really repent, he gives us wisdom. Well, why does he hold back? Actually, he's giving of himself to us. This is who his character is. This is his very heart. That's why wisdom isn't separate from God. It's in his character. It's the definition of who he is. And he pours out on us his Spirit. So this is the only way that you're going to get wisdom. You will not get it from an outside source. You have to go to God. You have to go to God. Let's look at one more passage to hopefully get this idea through. It's Jeremiah 29, and let's just look at verse 13. And again, this is going to be page 791. 29, verse 13. And I think we might have even heard this last week. I'm not sure. You will seek me, it says, and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. You will seek me and find me when you seek with all of your heart. Then again, it doesn't say there, you will seek me and find me when you try to seek me. Or you'll seek me and find me when you devote one day a week to, or a couple hours a week out of your week to me, but then go back to your other things all week long. It says you'll seek me and find me when you deliver yourself to doing that. Search with all of your heart, all of your being. You'll seek me and find me when you're surrendered. You're totally surrendered to me. So that is our first point. Pay today for wisdom, be protected tomorrow. Now let's begin to think about what wisdom does for us. We just saw God saying he's going to watch over us, he's going to guard us, and he's going to use the same language to talk about wisdom, by the way. Wisdom will watch over you, wisdom will guard you. He adds to this idea. And so let's read verses 9 through 11 here. Then you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. For wisdom will into your heart. Knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will protect you. Understanding will guard you. So a couple ideas to get through. The first thing is that you will grow in your love as God gives you this, right? And as you really receive it, and he sees that you want this and that you're surrendering to him, he gives you wisdom. And then as you get wisdom, you want more and more of wisdom. You learn to love wisdom. You didn't love it at first, but now that you're getting a bit of it, you're loving more, and you just want more of it. And the illustration that I want to give to how to understand this is classic music concerts, okay? So I've been to a couple classic music concerts since I've been here in the UK, and I enjoy them, but I enjoy them in a rather rudimentary way. I enjoy them because I hear lots of different varied noises hitting my ears, and I go, oh, that's very interesting. Oh, this is fun, okay? But if my father were to go to that concert, because he's a professional musician, or he was a professional musician, professional trumpet player for a while, or Chris, or Ernest, or any number of other people in here who love music, right? They would enjoy it quite a bit more because they know a thing or two about what's going on. They know about some of the finer nuances. They know about what music should be like and if they're playing well or not well. I mean, they would love it. And the more they know, the more they love. So that, in fact, if you ask Chris, one of his favorite things on earth to do is to go to the summer proms, okay? He loves them. And he loves to hear the music. And he loves to see the things. And he's going to love it more next year. This is what's happening with wisdom. God is now giving wisdom. And as they get the wisdom and they begin to, it changes them and they begin to love it more and more and more. Have you ever not understood something technical like a language and it just seems like nonsense to you, and then you begin to pick up just pieces? And that moment when you start to understand the language and you start to stretch out a bit and you go, oh, and then suddenly you really like the language and you really like what you're beginning to understand, right? You want more of it. This is what happens with God's wisdom. As he gives you wisdom, you grow in wisdom and it becomes part of you. And it changes things. And the way that it changes you is protecting and enabling and flourishing your life. So it gets inside of you, and then it does all sorts of things to protect you from all sorts of things that would destroy you. Flu jab. Okay. Hopefully, has everyone in here? Yes? I got the flu jab? No. Okay. All right. Excellent. This is good. So flu jabs are fun. You go in, all right? And it's very hard to put your finger on what changes for you, which is why most people are tempted not to do it. Okay? Because when they get sick, they don't think, oh, I'm sick because I didn't get the flu jab. They don't have the hindsight to see that in a lot of cases. But here's what happens. You go in, and it's painful. You get a needle jammed into your arm, and it's not a fun experience unless you're weird or you want to be a doctor someday, in which case it is fun, and go and do that, okay? But for most of us, it's not fun, okay? And then, on top of that, the next day, that spot on your arm just goes, right? It does not feel good, and it gets all stiff. And then what happens is, you have no idea what's going on in your body at all. But at some point in the future, a very bad thing gets inside of you, and it wants to terrorize you. And it runs into these antigens and is just defeated. And you just go about your business, not having any idea how you've been protected by this thing. And this is what wisdom does for you. It begins to change your life. It begins to change who you are. You begin to love it more and more and more, and suddenly you're a different person. And suddenly all those things that you normally fall into, you don't fall into them anymore. Because you're on a different path. You're going a different direction. It's just not for you. And it gives us kind of some specific examples here. Wisdom protects you from what you'd normally fall into. And we read this in verses 12 through 19. Let's look at that together. Wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men. It's actually singular, a wicked person. From men whose words are perverse, who have left the straight paths to walk in dark ways, who delight in doing wrong and rejoice in the perverseness of evil, whose paths are crooked, whose ways are devious. Wisdom will save you also from the adulterous lady, from the wayward woman with her seductive words, who has left the partner of her youth, ignored the covenant she made before God. Surely her house leads down to death, her paths to the spirits of the dead. None who go to her return or attain the paths of life. So here we have two groups of people who essentially have abandoned their faith, okay? Now, when someone decides that they don't want to walk with Jesus, okay? When someone makes that decision, it's usually a shock for the community when that happens. We're just kind of like, but actually, if we're being more honest with ourselves, this happens all the time. And it's not a surprise to God. That's why the example is here. These two people walking away from God, right? And some who walk away, they walk back, okay, which is great. But here you have these two people, they've abandoned their faith, and the idea is actually this sort of thing would knock us right out too, normally. If it came to us being in our normal state, what happens with us, we have this overestimated appeal about how great we are. Oh, I'll never do this, or I'll never do that, or I'll never get sucked into this, or get sucked into that. And then we get hit by something, and it hits us just like it hits every other person on earth. We don't have the power to say no to it. We should not be deceived. We cannot face the adversary alone. But wisdom helps us. It gets inside of us, it changes us, and helps us even with the very thing that would knock us over normally. How does it do that? The example I'll give is some relatives of mine. So I have some relatives of mine, and before they met the Lord, they were living together. They were doing drugs, lots of drugs, okay? They would actually be technically drug addicts, okay? And they were not nice people at all, in any sense. And then they both met the Lord around the same time. And within 2 months, all of that ended. All the drugs ended. All the bad behavior ended. They stopped living with each other for a short time and then got married, okay? What happened? How were they suddenly able to take all of these things that they'd fallen into and just put them away? And the answer is the sweeter song of the gospel, and the sweeter message, and the sweeter good of wisdom. They became in love with the one that loved them. And as they grew in that love and as they developed, they just didn't have place to waste it on something else. And that's what wisdom does for us. You pay into this. You say, this is what I value. And as you value it and as you pay into it, it becomes even more lovely and more wonderful for you. And you just can't waste yourself on this thing, this darkness that people are seeking. Did you notice what's going on there? They see something that they think is going to be hopeful, right? So they leave the path of righteousness to go after this thing. It's kind of like, I like wonderful looking old things, okay? Like old cabinets. That's really nice. Or old cupboards, that look very, they got the patina on them. So let's say that you go and you're looking for a dresser and suddenly you see what looks like a dresser that's made in the 19th century, okay? You're going to have yourself an Edwardian dresser, okay? Or something, right? And so you walk over, someone probably knows the right term for that. Anyways, you walk over to the thing, and as you walk over, you begin to see that you've been deceived about what this is. And as you get closer, you see that it's made out of plywood, okay? And someone has printed off the right color on a printer somewhere, and they've adhered it to the front of your dresser to try to say, look, this thing is old, but it's not old. It's not good. It's a piece of junk, right? And you want to kick the thing to the floor. This is how people spend their lives. They leave the love of God going after some placebo, some gilded waste, saying, I will find salvation there. And they walk off into the dark. And when they finally get their hands on what they think they want, they go, this is crap. And into the rubbish bin it goes. How can you avoid that? The sweeter song of the gospel, the sweeter song of God's love for you. How can you say no to sin? You love God more. You love God more. And as you grow in your wisdom, those things won't fit your life and they won't be around. Well, what we Christians like to say is that we can have both. Isn't that right? Wait a minute, I have to be forgiven. So since I'm going to be forgiven, God, and you have to forgive me later because I got the piece of paper. It says you're taking me to heaven. I'm going to go ahead and do what I want. And then I'm going to come back to you on Sunday and say, oh, I felt terrible about what I've done. Please take me back. I know you will. And God is calling us this morning to make this black and white. You cannot actually have both. If you choose sin, it's going to take you from Christ. If you choose Christ, it's going to take you from sin. It is one or the other. It is not both. You notice in this section how it talks about how they're leaving to go have this thing in the dark. The idea is they are going somewhere. You're not going to be in the same house. One way or the other, you're going to a destination. Either A, you're going towards your flesh, your desires. I want this, I want that, and I'm going to seek it, and I don't care. Or B, God is first, and I have to find a way to say no because I love him. It cannot be both. You know what happens when it is both? Misery. That's what happens. Let's just be honest with ourselves, okay? It cannot work. You go and you say, oh man, number one, you feel fake. And number two, you don't really feel like being with God. You're too busy thinking about the thing that you're pining after, and you're loving that thing more than the actual and sincere and gracious love of God, which is awful. And the way you get out of that is by choosing. I choose wisdom. I'm all in on this. I'm putting all my chips here. And as you do that, God will increase and grow your heart in his love so that it becomes your one thing, your magnificent obsession. Let's look at how he ends this section. Verse 20 through 22 concludes in a very interesting, nice way, and then we'll talk about how we apply this section to us. Thus, you will walk in the ways of the good and keep to the paths of the righteous. For the upright will live in the land, the blameless will remain in it. but the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the unfaithful will be ripped from it. If you were to look at chapter 1, it would end in a very similar way. The wariness of the simple will kill him, complacency will destroy them, but whoever listens will dwell in safety and be at ease without fear. And that's not a mistake. The two chapters are meant to be seen together. We can plant the good thing and get this wonderful, luxurious branch and this wonderful tree that sustains us, that sends us on the mission for which we are made, or we can plant a rotten weed in our garden and get this nasty bush that has to be removed, that ruins our life. And you know, we walk around and tell everybody my life's ruined, okay? With our behavior, with the way we go through life, we say, oh, what a mess it is. But we know why it's a mess, because we keep planting those nasty seeds in the ground. God says, do one or do the other. And he says, by the way, here's how it ends. It ends out that God is the gardener, and here he is looking at the weed, and here he is looking at the beautiful tree, and you know what he does? He goes over to the weed, and he rips the thing out of the ground, and he throws it in the bin. And this is what he's going to do with people. Do not be deceived. You have a choice. Invest in wisdom today. So Jesus is asking us, will you live this sort of wise life? Will you live this sort of wise life? What would it look like to say yes to Jesus? I'm going to be wise. The first idea I want to give you is total surrender. Christ calls you to repent and to give yourself entirely to him. If you're not all in, you're not in. It is in giving ourselves completely and fully to the Lord that God says, yes, I forgive him. Yes, I pour my wisdom into him. Yes, I'll turn them away from the path that they're on. I'll turn them towards righteousness. It is in trusting him that we get what we need. And just showing up to church is good. Don't stop coming to church. But there's more. And then there's that moment where you say, I want to be entirely Jesus's. I want to belong to him. I want to know him. And I want to give everything to him. And everything less than that is not worth you. So give everything to him. And feel, that's why Jesus came, to die for you so that you could be with him. That's the message of the cross, his love for you. But it's a message that requires an answer. And the answer shouldn't be, let's be friends, Jesus. The answer is, you be my Lord and take my sins. If you haven't made that decision, but you're doing other churchy things, we'll keep doing those other churchy things, but that's the big one. That's the one that changes your life. And I'd love to talk to you more about that. And that's something that you can say right now in your heart. Jesus, I'm sorry, and I want to live for you. Okay? And I surrender completely to you. The second thing, we have to go back, and Steve touched on this in a great way last week. It's going to be black and white. Now, it will be black and white. That is the way it's going to be. So if that's the way it's going to be, why do we have all of this hypocrisy in our lives right now? And so for us as Christians, we could have said when we met the Lord, I know when I met the Lord, I said, you're in charge from now on, God. I'm going to do what you say. And I meant it. And God has changed my life. But you know what? There are large pockets of things in my life that are not appropriate to God, that are not conforming to his will, that I know shouldn't be around. And I'm the Christian playing the game of, I can have it both ways. 1 foot in the world, 1 foot over here with you, God. This is getting harder every day. And God is telling you, just let go of the world, friend. Let it go. What are you doing believing some atrocious lie that the world is feeding you when you have the love of God over here? Go to war against that thing. You don't need it, whatever it is. I'm a Christian, but I have an anger issue. I'm a Christian, but I control things. I'm a Christian, but I'm lustful. I'm a Christian, but I'm addicted. I'm a Christian, but I can do all these things, and it's okay because I'm still all right because God's going to take me to heaven, so that's the bottom line, and I don't care about the relationship that I have with him. And Jesus says, no. Give it to me. Give me all of yourself again, and I will give you wisdom. I will grow you. Last thing. And on this note, actually, before I go on this note, sometimes we get demoralized, right? We say, oh man, you don't know. Half my life is weeds. Half my life is weeds. Have you looked at my garden? Well, I don't even want you to see it. It's horrible. And this message has made me feel worse. Thank you, Tim. Let me tell you what you can do. So I have a garden in my house, okay, on these little potted plants. I have these large potted plants up there. And we did this for the first time. We got all these vegetables because I like eating food. This is why I just grow vegetables. And I don't grow pretty things. I just grow things I can eat. So we have these things in the house. And I thought, you know what? It's the middle of the winter, but I'm going to put out a patch and just put some more stuff and see if it grows. And it did grow. And it took like 5 days. Literally, 5 days. You put the seed in, you water it a bit. 5 days later, you get something. Don't give up hope. You've got time to plant, okay? You have time to start fresh. Jesus will give you that fresh start. Yes, you're going to have to pull some weeds. He'll help you do that too. But determine, I'm going to plant. I'm going to plant wisdom. Okay, so don't be discouraged by that. Last thing, how in the world am I going to say no to sin, you say? You don't understand how hard it is for me I've been battling such and such for years. And it always gets me, and I stumble over it every time, and then I cry and I weep, and then I go to church and feel worse because you do a sermon like this, Tim. You can defeat it. Here's how you'll defeat it. The sweeter song. You're not going to defeat it by reading an amazing book about defeating sin. I know there are lots of them out there. Here's one more amazing book about how to defeat sin. It's not going to work. What will work is when you pour yourself into your relationship with Christ. Let him be your one and only. Keep seeking him. And as you do that, Christ is going to pour into you. And he's going to grow you. And you're going to find no place for that sin anymore. It's just, you're going to grow out of it because you have something better. This is the way that we are sanctified. This is how you become a sanctified person. It comes when we choose. We just keep choosing Jesus' relationship. And that's how you're going to defeat the sin that you think you can't defeat. It's actually going to be easy when you pour yourself into Christ. Let's pray about one of these three things, okay?